Today's shiur begins 7 lines from the top of Daf Lamed Gimel. On the side, you will notice a nosei, a topic heading, and we've mentioned a few points. Tefillah b'chol lashon. We're continuing with trying to find out the sources for different recitations as being possible to be recited in any language, as opposed to those types of passages that are restricted to be said in Hebrew. Tefillah, Shmona Esrei, the prayer, the 18 benedictions that we say every day, 3 times a day, that can be recited in any language. And Haim Hamal'ochim Makirim B'chol Lashon. Another point that will appear in this Gemara is the recognition on the part of angels of other languages other than Hebrew. Let's see the Gemara. The Gemara says regarding Tefillah, Rachmehi, it's a beseeching for heavenly mercy, heavenly compassion. That is what the nature of Tefillah is. And as such, Kol Heichi Deboi Matzli. However you should desire, so be it. Pray thusly. Rashi points out that you don't need a pasuk for justifying that prayer can be in any language. It's a svora, it's a type of, it's logical, since prayer is our turning to the Almighty and seeking His compassion in prayer, so you do it in any language through which you can accomplish that goal. The Gemara asks, Utfila b'chol lashon, is it really so that tefillah can be in any language? Notice we have a long question here. The HaRav Yehuda, li'olam al yishal adam tzrachav b'lashon aramis. Rav Yehuda says that a person should not utter his requests in Aramaic. The HaRav Yehonasan kol hashel tzrachav b'lashon arami. Anyone who asks for his needs in Aramaic, of course we say ask your needs from the Almighty. Ein malachei hashoris nizkokin lo. The service angels who are involved in the transportation of one's prayers to the heavenly throne, they do not attach themselves, they do not deal with people who request things in Aramaic. Lefi she'ein malachei hashoris makirin b'lashon arami. The service angels do not recognize Aramaic. These are, of course, very esoteric ideas. What does it mean they don't recognize it? Is it that they don't understand it? They don't want to understand it? Whatever the case is, we're presenting the Gemara in a very superficial, almost translation level, but nevertheless the point is conveyed that without the assistance of the service angels, the Malachi Ashari, so that one's prayers are going to really stay here on earth and not get to the heavenly throne. If that be the case, then how can the Mishnah tell us that tefillah can be in any language, and that would include Aramaic? Lo kashya, there is no difficulty. Ha b'yachid, ha b'tzibur. It depends if the person is praying on his own, is not part of a tzibur. Tzibur is a minyan of 10 males, 10 adult males. So if he's biyachid, he's praying privately, he should not pray in Aramaic. If however he's betzibur, he's in a group setting, the 10 male adults, in a prayers like that don't require the intervention or the assistance of the service angels in the transportation and the carriage of the prayers to the Almighty. The Almighty is present, so to speak. Again, these are very esoteric ideas, but for the purpose of understanding this, the Almighty is right there when a group of 10 people are davening. That's the significance of what we call Tefillah b'tzibur. Amongst other attributes that it has is this, that service angels are simply not involved in the transportation, in the conveyance of those prayers. The Gemara now asks a question. Notice again, it's a long question. V'ein malachei hashoris makirin b'loshen arami. Is that accurate? Is it accurate to say that the service angels do not recognize Aramaic? V'hatanya, we have a Tanaic source. In this Tanaic source, there are two incidents, and it says as follows: Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Yochanan the high priest. We should point out that the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, serves in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur. He is the one that does the service of Yom Kippur, and part of the service is the Kohen Gadol's entrance to the Holy of Holies, to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And it happened as follows: that Yochanan Kohen Gadol Shoma Bas Kol, he heard a heavenly voice, and at this point we're associating this heavenly voice with angels, with service angels. So he heard a heavenly voice, Mi Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim, from the inner sanctum on Yom Kippur during the avoda of the Kohen Gadol. Shehu Omer. Then this Bas Kol, this heavenly voice, was saying the following. There's an Aramaic phrase here, and it relates to the historical period of the Beis Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans, that were warring with the Greeks. And it says, the heavenly voice said as follows, and you'll notice this is an Aramaic phrase: Nitzchu Talia. Nitzchu is that's Hebrew word, but it means they were victorious. The Talia, that's Aramaic. That's the young Kohanim, the young Kohanim from the Hashmonoi Kohen family. They were victorious in battle. The Azlu la'agcha krova l'antuchia. They went to fight a battle. Antuchia is the name of a place, but for our purpose, it's a reference to war against the Greeks. And they were victorious, and that's what this heavenly voice announced, quite in Aramaic. V'shuv ma'isa b'Shimon HaTzadik. Another incident, this involving Shimon HaTzadik, also a Kohen Gadol. Sheshama Bas Kol Mi Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim Shu Omer. He heard a heavenly voice emanating from the Holy of Holies that announced, Betelas Avidita. Avidita is a military company. Betelas means they were canceled. This military force that was scheduled, that it was supposed to come and war against the Jews. Well, it was Betelas Avidita. The Chayil, the military effort, was canceled. The Omar Sano La'isa al Hechla. The plan had been for the enemies, for the hated ones or the enemies, La'isa, is to come upon the Hechal, to come upon the Beis Hamikdash, and to inflict injury and destruction. V'nerag Gaskalgis. Gaskalgis was the name of the king of the Greek ruler. He was killed. Ubatlu Gzerosav, and when the ruler is killed, so his edicts are also cancelled. So his Gzeros, his edicts were voided. The Kosvu Oiser Shah V'kivnu. They took note of the moment that this heavenly voice came forth, and it turned out to be exactly the time that these events took place. Ubaloshan Arami Hoya Omer. And here's the main point. And these announcements from the Bas Kol were in Aramaic. So the Bas Kol, the service angels, are quite familiar with Aramaic. So the Gemara has two approaches through which to resolve this seeming discrepancy. On the one hand, we said that the Ein Malachishos Makirin Beloshan Rami, and here you have some indication to the contrary. Number one, if you like, you can say Bas Kol Shiny, Shmuya Vida. A Bas Kol is a heavenly voice. It's a different spiritual entity than a service angel. The Bas Kol, its whole purpose is for disseminating information. It's a voice that is issued forth to be understood. That's the La Ashmuya Vida. We look in Rashi, Shiny Bas Kol. The Rashi we're looking at is about halfway down. The Rashi commentary, Oisa Mida Hamemuna Al Kach. That is a power, that entity that's appointed over this. That is we refer to as the Bas Kol. Yoidas B'Shivin Lishonos. It knows the 70 languages, but they Shasuya La Shmiya. It's made for the purpose of informing, of making known. V'hi mishtalachas l'chol halashonos pamim lozeh upamim lozeh. And it's sent to all different speakers of different languages, sometimes to this one, sometimes to that one. So the Bas Kol is not a challenge to the issue of the Malachei Ashores. We continue. Number 2, V'boyes Emo Gavriel Have. Another approach is that the voice that was heard from the Kodesh Kodeshim was the voice of the archangel Gavriel. In English, sometimes referred to as Gabriel. Diomamor Bor Gavriel Velimdoi Shivim Loshon. This is a very, very terse quote, but it appears later in our Mesichta that when Yosef was in Mitzrayim and he had to meet Paro was familiar with 70 languages, and it was urgent that Yosef would be able to meet Paro on his terms, also be conversant in 70 languages, and Yosef had not studied 70 languages, so miraculously through the intervention of this angel, Gavriel taught Yosef the 70 languages of the world, included in which is Aramaic, so that you see that the angel Gavriel, he is different. But in general, other angels are not familiar with Aramaic, or lo makirin. Again, we said earlier that the term lo makirin, it could be either they don't know it, they don't recognize it, or they don't want to be associated with Aramaic. Whatever the case is, the source that we read above is not a standard service angel. Birkas Hamazon, the grace after meals, that can be said in any language. Dichtiv, the pasuk in the Torah that is the source for Birkas Hamazon, V'yochalta v'savato v'rachtas Hashem Elokecha. That's the pasuk, and we derive from this B'chol loshon shato mevorech. The pasuk says that after you eat and are satisfied, you shall bless the Almighty. Bless the Almighty in any language. The pasuk doesn't establish which language to use, so you say it in any language. The Rashi points out that as we read the Gemara, we read Birchas Hamazon, you don't see the word minolon. From where do we know this? Because it's Rashi points out, you don't need a pasuk to say that Birchas Hamazon is in any language, because there's no reason to think that it should have been restricted to Hebrew in the first place. So when you read the source for Birchas Hamazon, it simply says that after you eat and are satisfied, so you bless the Almighty, and that itself entails the idea of bless Him in any language that you can. But Rashi it seems to me very, very precise here in terms of let's say the linguistic approach to Gemara study, and that is that the term minolon will appear when the Gemara is seeking a source for something that without which I would have thought otherwise. Here, with the Birchas Hamazon, the minolon word doesn't appear, because with regard to Birchas Hamazon, it's not as if I would have thought that it should have been only in Hebrew, that I need a pasuk to, we'll say, dispel that. We continue. Shvuas ha'idus is, we say, in any language. Dichtiv, the pasuk says, v'nefesh ki sechta v'shama kol olah. The Shvuas ha'idus was the oath that one would be required to take in the event that he claims he doesn't know testimony on behalf of someone else, and the court would impose upon the individual claiming he doesn't know testimony that he should swear to that effect. And the pasuk we just cited indicates b'chol lashon shehi shomas, the shomah kol olah, the individual shall swear concerning his denial of testimony in any language that the person hears or understands. Now, let's take a look at Rashi, and here we have something that ties into the point we mentioned just before with regard to the Birchas Hamazon. Notice, Rashi, Shvuas Ha'edus, he has an extra word that we don't have in our Gemara. He has the word minolan. And we explained a moment ago that when the Gemara uses the word minolan, and according to Rashi's text, it seems that word would have appeared over here in the Gemara. It's a word whereby the Gemara is asking, where do I know something without which I would have thought something else? And here, notice what Rashi does. He says, the E lo kosav kra, had I not had this pasuk which says v'sham'a kol ola, if I didn't have that ika l'meimar, I would have thought debo'inon dumu d'shvuas har grizim v'har evel shu b'loshan hakodesh. I would have thought that this process called shvuas ha'edus is patterned after the oath that the Jewish people had imposed upon themselves concerning the blessings and the curses at Har Grizim and Har Evel that we alluded to when we studied the Mishnah. And there, the Torah has a source for it being in Lashon HaKodesh specifically. So here, the Pasuk tells us, don't think that Shvuas Ha'edus is patterned after Har Grizim, Har Evel, and therefore, since we have this pasuk, I know not to pattern it after that, and hence it can be in any language. Shvuas HaPikadon, we say that the shvuah, that person who was given an item to watch, he's a shomer, and it got stolen, and he claims as a result of his claim of theft that he doesn't have to pay, being that the Torah provides an exemption for certain kinds of shomrim when it comes to theft, he nevertheless has to swear to that effect. And the Mishnah tells us that can be in any language. How do we know that? Asya techto mishvuas ha'edus. Through a word comparison, using the word techta, we conclude, just like in shvuas ha'edus, any language is acceptable, so too with regard to the Shvuas HaPikadon. V'elu ne'emorin b'loshan HaKodesh mikra bikurim v'chalitza. Here the Gemara is a bit terse, and it simply says ad mikra bikurim. The Mishnah made mention of a list of things that are said in Hebrew only, and that included the passage that one recites when he brings the bikurim, the first fruits of his orchard, of his fields. He brings to the Beis HaMikdash and presents it to the Kohen. So a passage is read. It's called Mikra Bikurim. And Chalitza, the shoe removal ceremony, what each party has to say. All of these have to be in Hebrew. So the Gemara goes over Mikra Bikurim Ketzad. How is the Mikra Bikurim? How do we know that it's only in Hebrew? The pasuk says Ve'onisa v'amarti l'fnei Hashem Elokecha. That's a pasuk that appears in the context of Mikra Bikurim Ulahalan hu Omer, and later it says in Devarim Perach Zayin pasuk Yud Dalid with regard to the Har Grizim and Har Eval experience, where the Jewish people split onto these two mountains, and the Levium were down between the two mountains, and blessings and curses were recited. And in that episode it says, V'onu haLeviim v'omru el kol ish Yisrael kol rom. And from that pasuk we say, Ma aniyah hamura lahalon b'loshan hakodesh, just like the word aniyah there by the Levium, by the Har Grizim story was in Hebrew. Af kan b'loshan hakodesh. So too by bikurim it is also, because you see the word v'anisa, the same word, the same root word appears there. It too, Mikra Bikurim, is in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew. Levium, Kufayim, and all. And regarding the Levium themselves, at Har Grizim and Har Eval, when they were reciting the blessings and curses, how do you know that itself had to be in Hebrew? Very nice, we said that it says there, V'onu HaLeviim, but the word Onu itself doesn't mean Hebrew. So the Gemara says, Asya Kol Mimoshe. In the case of the Har Grizim Har Eval Levium experience, the pasuk said, and we had written this in between the lines, it said koil rum. So you see the word koil by the Levium, and you find the word koil by Moshe Rabbeinu. Ksiv hachal koil ram, by Levium you see the word koil ram. Uksiv hasam, by the giving of the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, and now there is a basic assumption that the Torah was given in Hebrew. That is that's axiomatic. So it says with regard to the Matan Torah, Moshe Yadaber v'Elokim Yanenu b'Koil. So that the Torah was given in Hebrew, and you see the word koil there. Ma lahalon b'lashon hakodesh, just like there by the giving of Torah was in Hebrew. Af kan b'lashon hakodesh. So too by the Hagrizim Hareval experience, you see the word koil rum. It too means Hebrew. And with that, then you can use the v'onisa word that you find, or v'onu. That word then takes on the association with Hebrew, and that can be transferred then to other things where you see the word v'onu, like mikra bikurim. Chalitza ketzad, and it went on in the Mishnah to say v'onsa, v'omra, ulahalan ha'omer, v'chule, etc., and then Rabbi Yehuda omer, kocha, ad shetomar b'loshen hazeh. So in our Mishnah we saw a machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, what's the source for chalitza being restricted to Hebrew? The Tanakama had a gzera shava, comparing two different topics, and Rabbi Yehuda saw it in the posuk itself by chalitza, in which it says kocha, thusly. Kocha being a restricted word, means just as it is in the Torah, that's what they would recite. Now the Gemara asks for Rabbanan, Hai kocha mai avdi le. What do the Rabbanan who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, what do they derive from the word kocha? Answer, mibaya lahu l'davar shu maisim akev. They use the word kocha to tell us that when it comes to the Sotah process, those things that are action oriented, for example, there is the shoe removal, there is the spitting, that those actions are binding, they're ma'akev, without which the chalitza hasn't been fulfilled. Of course, the chalitza is the shoe removal ceremony to enable the widow of a man who left no children to be free to marry anyone she wants and not be restricted to the surviving brother. Rabbi Yehuda, where does Rabbi Yehuda know this point that a davar shu maises ma'akev miko kocha? The pasuk, instead of saying ko, it uses and adds an extra chaf, kocha, and that clues in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that the davar shu maises ma'akev. V'Rabbanan ko kocha lo mashmlu. The Rabbanan don't see any significance from the extra chaf for with regard to these purposes, and therefore kocha itself is the source for davar shu maisim ma'akev. And as far as how do the Rabbanan know only in Hebrew, they don't learn it from kocha, but rather they learn it from the comparison that we saw in the Mishnah. We continue to the top of Omid Beis, the Rebbe Yehuda, Hai v'onsa v'omra mai ovid lei. Rabbi Yehuda mentioned that the restriction in the case of chalitza is from the word kocha. What does Rabbi Yehuda do with the v'onsa v'omra pasuk which the Rabbanan used in the context of a gzera shava? Answer, miboya lei la'agmuri l'leviim de b'lashon hakodesh. What Rabbi Yehuda does with the v'onsa v'omra, he actually uses the chalitza pasuk as a source for Hebrew, and from the chalitza he learns Gzeira Shava in the other direction to the Levium, that the parsha of Hagrizim and Hareval has to be in Hebrew. So that's what the Gemara answers. Miboya le, he needs the onsa v'omra that you find by the chalitza le'agmuri l'leviim de b'loshen hakodesh, to teach me concerning the topic of Hagrizim and Hareval that it must be in loshen hakodesh only. Question: V'leilif koil mi Moshe. Why not learn that just like you find by the Parsha Vim, you find the word koil rom, and by Matan Torah you see Vashem Yanenu bekoil, and through the koil word comparison, you would be able to conclude that in the Levium, the Har Grizim Evel is in Hebrew. So that why does Rabbi Yehuda insist on learning the Levium being in Hebrew from Chalitza? Rabbi Yehuda could have learned the Levium be in Hebrew from Matan Torah. The Gemara answers, Ani Gomer, Koil Lo Gomer. This concept of comparison, of word comparisons, what we call Gzera Shava, is something a person does not invent on his own. It has to be something that you receive through an oral tradition, through a transmission from a Rav to you. And that Rav got it from his Rav. So that with regard to Rabbi Yehuda, he did not have a tradition concerning the word koil. He had a tradition, though, concerning the word aniyah. So the Levium are derived from Chalitza, and not, as far as Rabbi Yehuda is concerned, not from Matan Torah. Tanya Nami Hochi, Tanaic source that supports this, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kol Mokom Shenemar Ko Kocha Aniyah V'Amira, where you see any of these expressions, Eino Elo Lashon HaKodesh. It indicates Hebrew only. Ko, where do we find that? Ko Yisavarchu. Thusly, the Kohanim are to bless the Jewish people in Hebrew. Kocha the Chalitza. Kocha is from the pasuk that you find by the Chalitza. Kocha sheyel selisha shelo yivnes beisachiv, and Aniyah V'Amira. Those expressions you find by the Levium. And each one of those cases, the process or the recitation is restricted to Hebrew. Before we continue in the Gemara, we have a topic heading on the side. The Nosei reads Machlokes Tanoim al Hamikum Shel Har Grizim V'Eval, a Tanaic controversy concerning the location of these mountains, which was the geographic point in which the nation of Israel recited blessings and curses as are listed off in the Torah and Sefer Dvarim. Before we get into the Gemara, the text itself, of course you notice a very long Tanaic source. We want to read Pasuk Chof Tes of Perek Yud Aleph. We're talking about the end of Perek, toward the end of Perek Yud Aleph. Pasuk Chof Tes says, "V'hoyo ki yaviacha Hashem Elokecha el ha'oretz asher ata bo shama l'rishta," and it will be when the Almighty brings you into the land that you are to inherit. V'nosata es habrocha al har grizim v'esaklolo al har eval. The blessing will be when the Levium turn toward Har Grizim, and the Klola will be when they turn toward Har Eval. The pasuk that we will see darshaned in the Gemara, in this Tanaic source, is the next pasuk Lamed. So before we read the Gemara, before we read this brisa, which will break the pasuk down into phrases, let's continue reading what we see in the Chumash, pasuk Lamed, Halo Hemo Be'eva HaYarden. They are on the other side of the Jordan River, bearing in mind that the Chumash features the story of the Jewish people up till, but not including, their entrance into the land of Israel as a nation. So, geographically, the Jewish people were on the eastern side of the Jordan River. When you speak about the movement of people into Israel, which of course entailed the splitting of the Jordan River, you have them moving from east to west. So the pasuk tells us that Har Grizim and Har Eval were on the other side of the Jordan. Acharei derech mevoy hashemesh be'eretz haknani hayoshev ba'arava mul hagilgal eitzel elonei moireh. Now, in order to appreciate the pasuk, we turn to the Tanaic source, where pasuk lamed will be darshaned. Tonu Rabbanan. Again, the point here of this discussion is establishing the location of Har Grizim and Har Eival. The pasuk says, "Halohema beva hayardein." What does that mean? Me'ever liyardein v'elich divrei Rabbi Yehuda. It means it's on the other side of the Jordan. It means you'd have to cross the Jordan River and go way in. V'elich means go far in. It means you're going to be moving far west of the Jordan River. When we talk in terms of near and far, of course, these are relative terms, but it's certainly not it's not near the banks of the Jordan. The people would have to move further west, further in. That's Rebbe Yehuda's approach. There's another approach that, if you even skim down in the source, we've underlined the name halfway down, a little more, maybe you can see Rebbe Ozer says, Halohema beva yardein somuch liyardein. Right away, you can see that his opinion differs, and that he has the Har Grizim Eival located next to the Jordan River. So now, let's continue where we left off above. The pasuk says, Achrei derech mevoy hashemesh, mokoim shechamo zoyrachas. This is a tricky phrase. If we translate it, derech mevo hashemesh is a reference to the point where the sun rises. The word mevo or bo hashemesh is a tricky expression. It can take on different meanings. According to Rabbi Yehuda, mevo hashemesh means the arrival of the sun. The sun rises in the east. So when the pasuk says Halohema be'ever hayardein derech mevo hashemesh, it really means far from the east, far from the mokum shechama zorachas. The pasuk says be'eretz aknani hayoshev ba'arava elu har grizim v'har eival sheyoshvin bohem kusim. The pasuk says, in the land of the Canaanites that dwell in the Arava, the plains. So the Tanaic source points out that nowadays, when the Tanaic source was authored, the Kusi people live there. As far as the source in the Gemara is concerned, it had a reference point to where the Har Grizim and Har Eival were located. In other words, what I want to point out is that when the Gemara says Sheyeshin Be'em Kusim, that's not the interpretation of the pasuk. The pasuk speaks about in the land of the Canaanites that dwell on the plains, and that's Har Grizim Eival. And for convenience purpose, the Tanaic source says, and if you want to know where that is, nowadays, if you know where the Kusis live, then you know where Har Grizim and Har Eival was located. Mul HaGilgal, Samuch LeGilgal, near Gilgal. Gilgal is a location referenced in the Torah when they crossed into the land of Israel. Eitzel Eloneh Moreh, Shechem. That is a reference to the town of Shechem. V'lahalan Omer Vayavor Avram Ba'oretz Ad Mokom Shechem Ad Elon Moreh. And here you see a Gezerah Shava that we've seen in the past. Ma Elon Moreh Amur Lahalon Shechem. Just like Elon Moreh that you see in the context of Avram is Shechem. That's clear in the pasuk. Afkan, so too with regard to Har Grizim and Eival, where Shechem wasn't mentioned, all was mentioned was Elonei Moreh. So too Afkan by the Har Grizim and Eival understand Elon Moreh to be Shechem. Omar Rebbe Ozer Rebbe Yossi B'davar zeh ziyafti sifrei kusim. Rebbe Ozer Rebbe Yossi tells us that regarding this matter, I demonstrated how literally the books, the scrolls of the Kusim are a forgery. But if we let's say deviate for the time being from a literal translation, what Rebbe Ozer Rebbe Yossi is going to be telling us is that the Kusim, who were essentially non-believers in the oral tradition. Rashi points out that they had accepted the written Torah without the rabbinic tradition on how to understand the Torah. So he says to them, your approach to Torah by relying only on the written word will lead you nowhere. And that's what he's saying. Ziyafti, I demonstrated to them that their approach is empty. Now, what did he say? Omarti lem ziyaftem toraschem v'lo eleisem biyadchem plum. You made a mockery, a forgery of your Torah, and you got nothing out of it. Shatem omrim, you claim Elonei Moreh is Shechem. You claim that Elonei Moreh is a reference to the city of Shechem. Afanu modim she'Elonei Moreh Shechem. We too, who have the oral tradition, agree that Elonei Moreh is Shechem. Anu lamdinua b'gzera shava. We have a gzera shava method of learning, but that's an oral tradition. Atem b'ameh lemadatum. How do you know? You don't have Gezerah Shavas. You don't have that as part of your, let's say, tools for understanding the Torah, because you deny the oral tradition. And as we mentioned earlier, the power of learning Gezerah Shava is only because you have it as a tradition from your rabbi, who in turn had it as a tradition from his rabbi. But you guys, you Kusim, who deny that whole aspect of Torah known as the oral law, how do you know that Elonei Moreh is what you claim it to be Shechem? Rabbi Ozer Omer, Halo Heimo Be'eva HaYarden, Somoch LiYarden, Dichtiv. The section in parentheses is a skipped section based on the Bach commentary. So Rabbi Ozer says that the pasuk when it says Halo Heimo Be'eva HaYarden means next to the Yarden. Immediately, as soon as they would cross the Jordan River, very close to that location would be Har Grizim and Har Eval. Tichtiv, the pasuk says V'hoya ba'avrechem es HaYarden. That is in Devarim, Perek Chav Zayin, pasuk Dalet. If we just take a moment and read the entire pasuk, it says V'hoya ba'avrechem es HaYarden tokimu es avonim o'ela shonochi mitzave eschem hayom b'Har Eval v'sadeta oisam basid. So this pasuk from Perek Chav Zayin is a reference to Har Grizim and Har Eval, and it indicates, the word Avrechem indicates as soon as you cross the river, there you will find Har Grizim and Har Eval. Hence, that's the location as far as Rebbe Ozer is concerned, near the Jordan, not further west into the country. The pasuk said above in pasuk Lamed, Achrei derech mevo hashemesh, makom sha'achamo shokaas. So now the expression Achrei derech indicates far away from mevo hashemesh. Now what does he take mevo hashemesh to mean? From where the sun sets. So the sun sets in the west. So what the pasuk is telling us is far from the west. Rather, as we'll say, as easterly as you can go and still be in the land of Canaan and land of Israel, that's where Har Grizim Har Eval is. Be'eretz HaKanani. And here the source goes on, not explaining that, but rather pointing out Eretz Chivi Hi. The reason we explained the Gemara thusly is as taken from Rashi, where he says Be'eretz HaKanani Eretz Chivi Hi b'nichusa. It's not presented as a question or as a challenge. Eino Eretz HaKanani Elo Eretz HaChivi Daha Shechem Chivi Hui Hi Tichti Vayovo Yaakov Shalem Uksiv Shechem Ben Chamor HaChivi Nasi Oretz. If not for Rashi's use of the word b'nichusa, or possibly I'm not understanding it entirely, I would read this section with a Lashon Tamiha. There are several phrases that are difficult to understand, and the source points out the difficulties, and in a few lines you'll notice Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov enters the picture. He comes to explain that which the pasuk says in light of Rebbe Elazar's explanation above. So Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov is coming to interpret the pasuk in accordance with Rebbe Elazar's approach. But until we get to Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov, it would appear to me that the source is to be read with a tone of wonderment. So if we read again, the pasuk says Be'eretz HaKanani, but you would say Eretz Chivihi. It's really the land of the Chivi, because Shechem, which is the location for the brachas and klolos to take place is a land inhabited not by the Canaanite people, but rather by the Chivi people. The pasuk says, Hayoshev ba'arava, valo bein horim ugvos hein yoshvin. But is it not so that they live actually in a mountainous area as opposed to arava as a plain? Mul hagilgal, valo loro es hagilgal. What do you mean near the Gilgal? But they didn't even see the Gilgal. So Rashi says, "Mo gurchoikim min Gilgal heim v'hasimonim halalu lo aleim nemru v'loma nemru." So if these psukim, these phrases were not said with regard to the Har Grizim and Har Eiffel per se, so why were they stated? Why are these things here? So now the explanation is forthcoming. Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, he comes to explain in line with Rebbe Ozer above. Lo bo hakosav elo laharos lohem derech bashniya kederech she'era lohem borishona. The words here are actually guide words for the Jewish people in how to travel. Like there was a guide initially when they journeyed through the wilderness, there were clouds of glory, the Ananei HaKavod, there was a Amud Eish, a pillar of fire that guided them. So with the departure of those phenomena, the Torah provides guidance in how to travel. And that's what these words are referring to. The word derech, the Pasuk had made reference to Achrei derech mevo hashemesh. The word derech is b'derech lechu v'lo b'sodos ukramim. Go by way of the road, not through fields and vineyards. The pasuk had mentioned the word hayoshev ba'arava. B'yishuv lechu v'lo b'midbaros. Go through settled areas and not through deserts. Ba'arava lechu v'lo b'horom ugvos. Go through the plains, not over mountains and hills. Let's glance at Rashi on the lower part of the narrow lines. Kederech sheher lahem barishona, b'tseisa mitzrayim ba'omud onon. When they left Mitzrayim, they had the clouds of glory, lanchoisam haderech, to guide them through the desert. Kach bo achshov. So too now it comes liyashir dachem lohirusam aderech, to give them a straight path to travel. It's true that when the pasuk was recited, the pillar of cloud was still there, but the giver of the Torah knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was going to die, and with his death, no more clouds of glory. V'lo yelech im Yoshua, and the Amud Hanan would not continue with Yoshua into the land of Israel. So the Torah instructs that after they cross the Jordan, to conquer the land, yechu derech kavusha, v'derech meishar, v'derech eretz haknani. They should go over a traversed path, say a straight path, through the land of the Kanani, shehi arava, that is a plain. It's not hilly. Al yakifu somuch l'sfas hayardein derech eretz hachivi, shehi horim uvos, and not go around next to the banks of the Jordan, because that area, if you follow along the banks of the Jordan, you find it to be very mountainous, and that's where the Chivi actually lived. Elo yikonsu l'socha mitzad marav rochok min hayarden v'yakifu v'yichbeshu. Rather, they should go in a westerly fashion and enter deep into the land, far from the Jordan, and proceed that way and conquer the land. As we continue in the Gemara, there's a topic heading, and it reads Ad Lamed Dalim Beis. So there's a rather long topic ahead of us. Ketzad Ovru Yisrael Es Hayarden. The Gemara describes how the Jewish people crossed the Jordan River into the land of Israel. we're going to be using a double underline to highlight the expression b'chol yom, and the dashed underline emphasizing the word hayom. Now the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan, Ketzad Avru Yisrael es Hayarden. How did the Jewish people cross the Jordan? B'chol yom oron noseya achar shnei degolim. Every day, meaning during the trip of the Jewish people after the exodus from Mitzrayim through the Midbar, the Holy Ark that contained the 10 Commandments, it traveled behind 2 tribes, literally 2 flags, but 2 degolim is reference to 2 tribes, and the setup is described in Parshas Noso in Sefer Bamidbar. V'hayom, and now on this day, the day of crossing into the land of Canaan, Nosa Tchila, the Aron went ahead of the people. Shenamar Hine Aron Habris Adon Kol Oretz Over Lifnechem. Here the Aron Habris, the Holy Ark, the Ark of the Covenant of the Master of the world, Over Lifnechem, is going to go ahead of you. B'chol yom v'yom, on a regular day during their travel through the Midbar, Leviim noisim es ha'aron. The Leviim carried the Aron. Vayom nasu kohanim. And on that day, Kohanim are actually a subdivision of the Leviim, but the Kohanim are all descendants of Aharon HaKohen. So on this day that they crossed over, specifically the Kohanim carried it. Shenemar v'hoyo kenoyach kapois raglei HaKohanim Noisei Aron Hashem V'Gomer. In Mirz Hashem, in the upcoming Gemara, we'll see more detail as to what took place. But on that day, the last point we mentioned is the Kohanim took over the carrying of the Aron. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.